During the course, you will mostly work with the Linux terminal. You will use it to look up configurations, change files, start or stop services, and much more. For this purpose, it's relevant that you understand the basics of how it works. If you are already familiar with Linux, or especially the Linux terminal in different variants, be it the bash or the fish shell, which is what we use, then you can skip this section. If not, however, it makes sense to have a look at this unit where we teach you the basics of the terminal. So first of all, where do we find the terminal? There are multiple ways. First of all, on the right side here we have this icon. So that is a terminal icon, and if we click on it, then we open the terminal here, and we can also increase the size by pressing Ctrl+, and now it's also more easily readable. This terminal is now connected to the VLab, so the complete virtual machine that you downloaded, and it is not connected to a running core setup. You can see that because here it says we are the user iLab, which is the default user, and we are connected to the virtual iLab, which is the name of the virtual machine that runs here. Now if we start a core setup, so we can check the VLab control center and start, for example, part 1. And now we start the setup by clicking on the green button here. Now it's running. We can double click on one of the hosts, and then we get an interface, a terminal that is connected to that host. So we can see that here that now we are the user root, and we are connected to Hive-A. That means now everything we do here does changes in the file system of the VLab and does not affect the core setup. Except, of course, if we change anything before we start a core setup and then we start core, so for example creating files, and the core setup doesn't override these files, then these files would also be available on all of the core hosts. But if the setup is already running and you do anything in the VLab, it doesn't affect the core setup at all. So if you want to change something in core, you have to do it this way, that you start the setup, double click on the one host that you want to have a terminal to. So you can also double click on B to get a terminal that is connected now to Hive-B. You can also double click on Hive-A again. So now you have two terminals connected to Hive-A, and you can, for example, edit multiple files at the same time, one in each terminal. And yeah, that's already the basics on how you can open a terminal. So everything you change here will affect the file system or services running on Hive-A. Now you already saw that we have different users. So we have the root user and we have the iLab user here. And the main difference here is that the iLab user has restricted rights. So the main purpose is to prevent you from accidentally deleting some files, for example, that are required for booting the VLab or similar. In order to change some specific configurations, so for example for a network, you usually require more rights than a regular user like the iLab user has, which means you need root rights. Or not necessarily, but they have basically root means you have all the rights. As in the core terminals, you are root by default. Usually you can just type in your commands and you have all the necessary rights. If in some exercises you have to access files or change configurations where you are not logged in as root user, but for example as iLab user, you can use sudo and then type in the command, like for example sudo nano file.txt. Nano is a text editor we have a look at later, and if the file.txt can only be edited by root user, you could also use it this way, which means or tells the terminal to execute nano with root privilege. So then you can also edit that file. Okay. And you can also switch to the root user by typing sudo su. So su stands for switch user, press enter, and then now you are the root user. And you can also go back by just typing exit, and you're back to the ilab user. In case you're ever asked for a password or a user, it's the default user is ilab, as we see here, and the root password or the sudo password is also the ilab, all small letters. That's it for a basic introduction. In the next steps we have a look at the Linux file system and how to navigate through it and handle files.